Yeah, they can still hear you.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick reintroduction because I don't know if you heard that or they heard that. So the first speaker, we have Michael Corbett. He's a 2012 graduate of the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. He has general law practice with a focus on transportation, and most recently acted as a solicitor LRT for Metrolinx in the City of Hamilton on a property-related matters, including exploration for the City of Hamilton Light Rail Transit Project. So everyone, please welcome Michael.
Yeah, actually, it's great to be in Sudbury. I'm from Sudbury, and when I was preparing this presentation, I really wanted it to be centric to the north. As Northern Ontarian, there's just unique issues related to Sudbury that I wanted to touch on. Is anyone here from Sudbury? Or okay, but most not from Sudbury. So how have you found the roads in and around Sudbury? Or how's the drive up here? It was decent. So you'll notice, like just driving around the city, that it's a fairly unique place with unique features that cause unique problems for anyone in the road safety industry. So it's a broad overview of what my presentation is. First, I'll be discussing some of those unique features of Sudbury, including the Canadian Shield, which is a massive rock formation that spans throughout the north. And I'll touch on the overall process of building in a general sense with respect to large infrastructure projects. And with that, there's really two parts. There's the initial contracting phase and procurement, as well as often long-term maintenance contracts that span like decades into the future. So with that, that will really be more of the emphasis of the presentation, that long-term maintenance phase, which involves ongoing review of the roadway and ensuring that it's meeting provincial standards. And there's legislation associated with that and ways that municipalities and individual property owners as well can help enforce overall road conditions. So with that, I'll get to that first part, background. So as I said, City of Sudbury, as well as highways throughout the north, have unique features. For anyone who drove up here today, you'll I'm sure have noticed these large rock formations, which require extensive blasting and dynamite for any large, in the initial stages when building these highways, and it creates unique issues. Not only do we have these rock formations, but it's also like a northern climate. So there's ongoing freeze and thaw cycles that cause havoc to the roadway. There are Aboriginal land claims, as well as just issues related to water. So, as I mentioned, the initial process of building a large highway like that can be divided into two major phases. These projects are often made up as design, build, maintain, operate. That's the overarching framework of that construction process. So I see it as two major phases: the design build phase, which is essentially like the procurement and design, initial contract formation. So when you're not only entering into that procurement stage, there's a lot of high level contracts that take place, and it may be between the Crown and the builder, and the overall negotiation that's taking place there is like, where should risk be allocated throughout the construction contract? And it matters throughout the lifespan of the roadway, because any issues that arise ultimately from a legal perspective, it's going to go back to some of those initial contract documents. So often in a major infrastructure project, you're getting, as I said earlier, long-term maintenance contracts that, again, can span several decades. So that will really be part of or I guess the focus of the latter half of my presentation. And I'll touch on some of the key pieces of legislation that assist in that maintenance process. So in that initial design build phase, not only are you negotiating those base level contracts, you're also having to expropriate land in and around the highway. And in the north, one of the major issues that we have, and it's become a political issue, is with respect to widening Highway 69. They've done an excellent job over the past decade with widening from Parry Sound to Sudbury, but there's still a stretch that hasn't, it's still 2 lanes. So I don't know, I'm sure anyone who took 69 up to Sudbury noticed that there's a stretch that's 2 lanes. Widening that portion of the highway isn't as easy as you would think. Like, there's often claims in and around private property claims, as well as mining claims, Aboriginal land claims. So in that initial process, you're having to negotiate with all these individual stakeholders, and it's extremely expensive. It can become like a political issue, especially with the Aboriginal land claims. So road widening isn't necessarily the easy answer in terms of road safety. And it's important in the north because of those rock formations. They can, like, they're real obstacles, and they need to be as far away from the highway as just to ensure road safety. So it's an expensive process. It's a recent case that involved 19 million tons of rock or aggregate, and the negotiation with respect to like the value of that rock. And a big part of that was mining companies that had claims associated with the rock formations. So it becomes quite costly, and I think it's not something that the province or federal government, both of whom can expropriate. They don't like to do it because it's seen as heavy-handed from a governance perspective. So really what you need to find is like more practical solutions to road safety. And again, like a major issue in Canada is the accumulation of ice and snow on the roadways, which needs to be cleared on a regular basis, and there are maintenance obligations that municipalities have. So it's really a need to find some of these practical solutions as to how you can ensure the roadways remain over that 30-year lifespan. Not that the road will necessarily last that long. The road will typically last 10 to 12 years. But that maintenance obligation can extend, and it's really a matter of ensuring that the road is in the best condition possible from a highway safety perspective. So those freeze thaw cycles that occur on an annual basis cause real havoc to the roadways, and it costs Canadians $3 billion per year, which is a massive amount and something that could be avoided. So really, it's a matter of examining what that standard is for road maintenance, ensuring that the standards is being enforced. And there's different ways to do that. You can enforce the road standard as a private property owner, or let's say you're in an automobile accident and you get into an accident related to like a road that isn't in the condition that it should be, then you take that to civil court. A lot of this is common knowledge. from an expropriation perspective, that would go to an administrative tribunal, highway traffic issues, criminal court. So really, in terms of potholes, the minimum maintenance standard for a pothole, if you see any in around Sudbury, and there may be some, maybe more here than in other municipalities, but the pothole depth that's permitted is 8 centimeters, as well as, depending on the class of highway, but in general, the pothole depth shouldn't be any more than 8 centimeters. And if it is, then the municipal may have like a real problem. So anytime you do see a pothole and it's over 8 centimeters, it's worth either reporting it to the city or to someone who will report it to the city, because it creates a real hazard. And as you can see, there's different classes of highway, but for the most part, a class 1 highway is one where there's large volumes of traffic. So that's where there's the strictest standard. From a liability perspective, the municipality has to act in a way that's reasonable, and that's obviously a very broad term, like what is and what is not reasonable. So when you're examining that pothole and it's over 8 centimeters, and you think that the municipality is acting in a way that they shouldn't be, they're exposed to a potential claim of negligence. So from a municipal perspective, their requirement is to act in a way that is reasonable. And it's really like there's a significant amount of discretion that goes with decision making at the municipal level. So they're, well, from my experience, they're good at finding ways to protect themselves from liability. Just getting information in any type of lawsuit from a municipality can be an onerous task. So there are other pieces of legislation. That was the Municipal Act, but other key pieces of legislation include the Aggregate Resources Act, as well as the Drainage Act. The Aggregate Resources Act regulates quarries in and around the north, which is where the rock resources come from that actually build the highways. So the province sets minimum standards as to like what that resource, how that resource should be maintained. And when you have a pothole and it needs to be replaced, it's important that whatever is replacing that pothole be at high quality aggregate. So the Aggregate Resources Act helps regulate that and ensures that everyone who is in that industry has a license. And if they don't have a license, they can be fined up to $1 million, which is quite strict. Major issue, again, is the freeze-thaw cycle, and the Drainage Act helps regulate that. When you're building highways through large rock formations, you're inevitably impacting the ecosystem. So the way that water flows isn't necessarily flowing the way that you'd expect it to. And so the Drainage Act really allows property owners to come in and petition the municipality to add additional drains if needed. So the Aggregate Resources Act, it's a licensing regime. And again, it creates an offense for persons to operate a quarry without a license, and those fines can be up to $1 million. It also regulates the emission of air quality emissions in the road building process. So the Drainage Act, which is, in my opinion, a key part of road safety, protects property owners who have water running through their property. Like there's you can really look at this not only from like a highway perspective, but just from like your own property. Like if you have property and there's water flowing through your property, there's regulations as to what you can and can't do. So what you should be doing is ensuring that whatever you built on your property is not obstructing the water from flowing naturally into the watershed. If you are obstructing that waterway, you lose something called riparian rights. And that's the right to use that water in a way that it's the riparian right is really the right to use property that, or use the water that flows through your property in a reasonable manner. So if you notice that water is accumulating on the roadway or on your property and it's not draining the way that it should, you can petition the municipality where you live and they can install a drain. There's also practical solutions, the installation of a catch basin or a French drain. Some have said the Drainage Act is weak in that it's not really enforced the way that the Aggregate Resources Act. If you look at the penalties, like Aggregate Resources Act, the fines are in the $1 million range, whereas the Drainage Act, the fines are $1,000. So it's still a fine. Like if there's an object obstructing drain on or near your property, you can be fined $1,000. Could also be potentially sued from another private property owner or someone who gets into an accident related to drainage issues on your property. So solutions to that issue, again, individual property owners should be monitoring the water on their property because in the wintertime, it inevitably freezes and can create black ice or seep. The water ultimately seeps into pores within the road, and it's really what causes cracks. Like this photograph, that's a photograph from the sidewalk at my parents' house where water is not flowing the way that it should, and literally over the course of like 2 years, the sidewalk deteriorated and it's like cut in half basically just due to water. Like it's amazing the problems that water causes. So another solution, you can have someone register a conservation easement on your property. So that would enable conservation body to enter onto your property and ensure that water is flowing the way that it should. There's also advances in electronic road monitoring systems, which haven't been widely adopted, but in some municipalities, they'll take problem areas and use electronics to monitor how the water is accumulating on the roadway. And again, the practical solution, if you have property either on the highway or on a roadway and it's not flowing the way that it should be, you can install a drainage system and ensure that it's flowing into the waterway. In Sudbury, we have something called Junction Creek, and it flows throughout the city. It's not in the condition, I mean, it's come a long way over the past 10, 20 years. But you can see that water isn't necessarily flowing into the junction the way that it should. So if everyone actually got on board and monitored the flow of water on the property, it would do a lot, not only for the roadway, but for the environment in general. But also if you are to do any like digging on your property, it's important to call the utility company first. And I'm sure everyone is aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone have any questions in the room? I have a question actually. So we were talking about potholes,
Right.
and kind of I guess municipality's responsibility to fix them. So I remember talking to some police officers a while back and telling them about some potholes on some of the local roads, saying like, you guys got to fix this, like, or get someone to fix this. And they said they're keeping it because it actually reduces speed. If they were to fix it, it would just, people go blazing in the area. So what are your thoughts on that? Have you heard of anything or?
I think, like I've seen roads in Sudbury that probably have taken that approach. Again, like it really comes down to what is the nature of that pothole. And you have to be, it's something that you really have to be careful about because there are not only potholes, but sinkholes, which aren't readily available to, or readily visible. And it's something that occurs underground. And it's not until a car drives over the roadway and the entire road collapses that it becomes an issue. So it's, I don't know. I'd be more inclined to take a close look at what the nature of the road is and ensure that there's no major issue. But if it's 8 centimeters, then it should definitely be like reported.
For sure. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so the next presenter we have is Milad Delavaryforoutaghe. He is a research associate with the Traffic Injury Research Foundation since December 2021. He is a statistician in road safety and passionate about data analysis. Milad is also pursuing his PhD at the University of Quebec. His doctoral thesis topic is about analyzing paramedics' road collision data set on the island of Montreal. He obtained his master's degree in highway and transportation engineering and worked on the application of time series models to evaluate the impact of law enforcement on gender-specific incidence rates of road traffic injuries and mortalities in Iran. Since graduating from the master's program, Milad served as a traffic advisor for several municipalities on road geometrics and traffic design. He recently also worked on the impact of COVID-19 on road safety. Welcome, Milad.
Thanks, Robert. Hello, everyone. I hope you are going well. So today I'm going to present a new topic for you. Most of us maybe see collisions or near collisions or near hit collisions or the ambulance collisions when they are entering to, for example, intersections and the yield of the rights of civil drivers and so on. So this research is part of my PhD, and in this study, I'm going to talk about which factors are involving in such collisions for ambulance and the paramedics, and the studies for the province of Quebec. But why I choose this topic? It's because 33% of the drivers involved in the traffic collisions are professional drivers or emergency professionals, commercial or emergency professionals. And the cost of such collisions are almost 250 billion, which is the annual global cost of the emergency collisions. And especially in the province of Quebec, from 2000 to 2008, 2% of all workers involved in around 30% of total mortalities, which is the result of road collisions. And also based on the current database I'm going to talk for the province of Quebec, from 2010 to 2020, there are 1,228 paramedics collisions, including 370 injury collisions and also 858 non-injury collisions. If you look at this graph, the vertical axis is the number of collisions with injuries, and the horizontal is the period of our study, which is from 2010 to 2020. And if you see the green line, which is for the Montreal, we have the highest number of collisions with injury for the Montreal from 2010 to 2020. And after that, the yellow line is for the Montérégie, which is after Montreal. So in this study also, in this, Montreal and Montérégie, I will talk especially for these two regions. So as I said, this figure is for the 17 regions of the Quebec, and you can see the collisions with injury for all of these regions. So what is the objective of this result? So I'm going to document how these road collisions of the ambulances distributed among these 17 regions, and then evaluating which factors are involving in the quantity and the quality and the severity of the paramedics collisions, and also compare the results of the Montreal and Montérégie as two regions with a high absolute number of collisions with injury with the province of Quebec. Our data are from the Société de l'Assurance Automobile de Québec, and our period of studies from 2010 to 2020 with 15 regions, and we captured the collisions involving an ambulance. Which factors we use in this study? We use the collisions characteristics like time of day, days of the week to see how they are distributed, number of vehicles involved in such collisions, the type of collisions, for example, whether it is fixed object or not, whether it has with other civilian drivers, with animals, and etc. Mode of transportation, is it light, is it heavy vehicles, pedestrian, and etc. Also the environment of the collisions, for example, whether it is a type of environment, whether, for example, it is in residential, in the commercial, and etc. Surface states, lighting condition, it is day, night, is good lighting condition or not. Weather condition, which is really important, especially for Canada and Quebec, and work zone. And also I figure the road and traffic characteristics, like, for example, whether the collisions happen in the speed limits post, for example, 50 or more, and etc. Configuration of the road, traffic condition, work zone, as I said, lighting condition, localization of the collision, whether, for example, it is happening in the intersection or not, and the asphalt condition. I use logic regression for evaluating these data. So the response variable should be the odds of severity of ambulance collisions, and the explanatory variables are those variables I mentioned. For checking the multicollinearity, which is one of the important factors for logic regression, I use variance inflation factor. And for the accuracy, as you can see in this table, I use the area under receiving operating curve, which is ROC curve. And this curve is produced based on the true positive, true negative, false positive, and false negative of the models, and how this model predicts the data. As you can see, this figure, the vertical line is the rates of the collisions. So in this figure, you can see the collisions per the injury collisions and non-injury collisions per 10,000 population. And you can see here that Gaspésie, which is one of the regions in Quebec, has the highest number of injury collisions. And for the Montreal, we have the highest number of non-injury collisions, the rate of the non-injury collisions. In this slide, you can see the distribution of collisions in different hours and days of the week. And as you can see for the left figure, which is the number of collisions across the different days of week. On Fridays, we have the highest number of ambulance collisions for both injury and non-injury. And for the hours between 12 to 4 p.m. also, we have the highest number of collisions. This slide shows the different type of collisions, and the collisions with road vehicle, which is really obvious, we have the highest number. But what is really interesting here, and I want to mention, is the fixed object collisions and collisions with pedestrian, bicycle, and train, which are also other type of collisions that we should think about them. Here we can see the different types of environment that the ambulance collisions happen, and in the business and commercial areas, we have the highest number, and after that in the residential area. For the different surface state, normally in dry condition, we have the highest number, and after that in wet conditions for the province of Quebec. For the different speed limit zones, in the zones with 50 kilometers per hour speed limit, we have the highest number of collisions. And it shows that one of the problems for ambulance is the urban areas, because normally 15 kilometers per hour are in the urban areas. And after that, for example, 60, 70, and 80, you can see. For the light conditions, most of the collisions happen in daylight and clear, and after that for the night with the lighted paths. What is here is really important for the ambulance collisions, the intersection areas. So here we can see that most of the injury and non-injury collisions happen at an intersection less than 5 meters area. So most of the collisions for the ambulances happen in these kind of location. And also for the asphalt condition here, we can see that for those areas that we have, for example, construction, or the areas are under reparation. So we have the highest number of non-injury collisions, and for in good conditions, we have highest number of injury collisions. So the results of logic regression shows us that those accidents, because also we use the accidents like, for example, fire, while we don't have any traffic collisions, but like those kind of accidents increase the odds ratio of severity of collisions with almost 15 times. And in the province of Quebec, areas between intersection, probably because we have a lower speed. So these results can result in the decrease of the odds ratio. And also, as I said, those areas with construction or the under preparation, we have the reduction of odds ratio. So here we can see the results of the VIF, which shows that we don't have any, based on the values of VIF, we don't have the problem of multicollinearity. And also the areas on the rock curve, which is 0.94, it shows our model has a good accuracy. And the results also of Montreal and Montérégie, for just comparing to the province of Quebec, shows that incidents, as I said, for example, like fire incidents increase the odds ratio as the province of Quebec. And also in Montreal, we can see that the collisions with fixed objects, so we have a problem of fixed object, and those collisions increase the odds ratio. And also collisions at intersection can increase the odds ratio about 4.5 times. So it's really interesting, and it's really important that we focus on intersections in Montreal for these collisions. And as I said, highway construction, maybe because we have a lower speed, those areas reduce the odds ratio. And for the Montérégie, also these areas can reduce the odds ratio. But what we found for the Montérégie, which is really here new, the slice surface can increase the severity of the collisions with almost 4.2. As a discussion, although Montreal and Montérégie have the highest number of collisions, I mean absolute number of collisions among all 17 regions in Quebec, but they are not in the top regions respecting the injury collision rates. So for example, Montreal has almost 5.6 and Montérégie has also almost 3 injury collision rates, but they are not in the top regions. So it means that in Montreal and Montérégie, the reasons we have the highest number of absolute injuries is because they are facing to more exposures and calls comparing to other regions. And as I said, collisions at intersections in Montreal increase the odds ratio, while the areas between intersection in the province of Quebec decrease these odds ratio. And the zones with 50 kilometers per hour, they are really important in the Quebec. So we have almost half of the collisions happen in these kind of zones. So we can focus on these kind of zones. And also, as I said, the commercials and after that residential areas can increase the severity of the collisions. Most of the collisions normally happen in the clear weather, but slush surface increase the odds in Montérégie. And asphalt operations and the areas under reparation can decrease the odds ratio. And light vehicle and after that, bicycle and motorcyclists are among the top transportation modes that are involved in the collisions of ambulances. And also fires and the accidents like fire can increase the odds ratio. So all in all, the ambulance drivers are facing to like hazardous exposure and the risk due to their job. So we don't have a lot of options to reduce this problem because they are facing to a lot of calls, a lot of exposure, and it's their job, stress, under pressure. But these data and these results can lead to better informed decisions for policymakers. How, for example, they can implement educational programming or training for the drivers, for example, when they are entering into the intersection. So in this case, for example, changing the policies, how, for example, when they enter to the intersection, at first they stop and then they enter to the intersection. And marketing campaign, or for example, new technology like in-vehicle monitoring system to give them the real-time feedback can help and improve the safety of ambulance collisions and other civilian drivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mila. Great presentation. Very important stuff. Any questions?
With the aging population, the baby boomers kind of getting older, do you see more frequent ambulance need and also more ambulance collisions in the near future? I guess in particular in demographics with major, I guess in particular the demographic with like major cities and stuff like that across Canada, or would you just say it's kind of like showing a bump and increase, right? Because everyone's aging. And,
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, have you noticed that in your research?
Yeah, it's a good question. This research doesn't evaluate the increasing demand for the future, but it's really important that we think about the increasing demand and how we can improve or increase our facilities or ambulances or using technology for this demand in the future of the Canada and Quebec and other provinces. But yes, this analysis just focus on the ambulance drivers and the process of happening collisions. But for proposing the strategies, it's a really good point that we also investigate this point for the future. Thank you.
Just curious how much of the blame of these collisions gets placed on a motorist versus the operator of the paramedic vehicle. You know, big issues around moving out of the way of emergency vehicles. something, the way that motorists are responding might be contributing
Okay.
the increase.
Okay. So your question is about knowing whether civilian drivers or ambulance drivers are responsible for the collisions. Okay. So in this data, which are from the SAHU in Quebec, so we don't have these data to know who is the responsible of the collisions. Why? Also, I have other set of data that in future I present the research and the work about it. So in those data, which are from the Urgence Santé of Montreal, we have the data of, for example, whether civilian drivers are responsible or, for example, ambulance drivers are responsible. And just as a point that it's really important to mention that the civilian drivers are responsible significant for these, collisions. And as I, for example, mentioned, for example, like pedestrian or bicyclists. So what here is really important to figure out the distraction of the civilian drivers when they are facing to the ambulance or ambulance drivers and the other problems that we have, for example, the yield of the right to the ambulances. Yes. Yeah.
Any more questions? Just a comment, I'm thinking this is very interesting work. One of my colleagues does work with shift workers and sleep, and she's finding that sleep can contribute to sometimes the paramedics getting involved in crashes because they're working like 12-hour shifts when they're tired.
Exactly.
Right? Interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's one of the problems. The paramedics, it's not problem, it's their job. They're under pressure, shift changing. Sometimes they should work in the day, sometimes night, and they are facing to these kind of problems. So drowsiness, sleep, and facing to multiple tasks. So yeah, in the next study, as the other part of my research, also I will evaluate this point and the distraction to know what is the process of happening in collisions when the drivers, especially paramedics, are facing to these kind of human errors. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There you go. Am I supposed to like clip this on? Bill, oh, awesome.
Okay, so our next presenter is Jerome Range. Jerome started his bachelor's degree in kinesiology in 2020 at the University de Quebec de Chicoutimi. Since the start of his bachelor's, he's been working as a research auxiliary with Dr. Martin Lavalier and is planning on going forward with a master's degree in road safety in 2022 in injury prevention with first responders. Everyone, please welcome him.
Hello, everyone. So today I'll be presenting the analysis of Instagram as a viable and credible means to gather data for research applied to bike patrol police officers. So as you all know, research methods aim to be closest to reality as possible. And when we look at first responders in a road safety context, we haven't found any optimal research methods. There are two notable reasons for this. First of all, for safety perimeters that are put around, for example, crime scenes. And then just being at the right place at the right time, because as we know, first responders have to move at a moment's notice. So trying to be a researcher that follows those movements isn't something that's very easy. So the goal of this study was to see whether or not a social media platform could be used to gather usable and credible data on first responders in general. And in this case, we went for bike patrol police officers. So as for the methods, 200 images were extracted from Instagram, and the images were found with 1,696 keywords. Obviously, at first, we didn't have 1,696 keywords. We started with a few keywords in both English and French. And then for example, with one keyword, we'd find an image. The image would have 20 keywords, and we'd use some of those keywords to find other images. And this actually helped us find images in other languages apart from English and French. For example, Portuguese, Italian, and Spanish, notably. The inclusion criteria, pretty simple, just having at least one bike patrol police officer. Exclusion criteria was anything involving riots, since we were really looking for bike patrol police officers that are looking to get closer to the population, to have more of like a human side with police officers. And riots often, for example, teams of 20 police officers dressed in full-on black anti-riot gear at protests weren't exactly what we were looking for. And anything involving training camps, because often in training camps, well, they aren't trying to get closer to the population, they're just practicing, and it's not necessarily police officers, more police officers in training that are there. So with those 200 images, we had 45 descriptive variables that were used on each image using a Google form document. And with those 45 descriptive variables, we can divide them into 4 subcategories. So first of all, we had information on the image itself. So things like the upload date, where the image was uploaded from, what kind of account uploaded the image. Next, we have information on the police officer. So things like age, gender, ethnicity, and whether or not they were clearly identified as police officers. Then we had information on the police officer's equipment. So things like, were they wearing a helmet? Did they have a bulletproof vest on? Did they have glasses? What kind of shoes were they wearing? What color pants? And finally, we had information on the bike. So what kind of tires did they have? What was the bike model? Did they have sirens on the bike? Speed system? What kind of brakes? What kind of bike? So going forward with the results, here we have a map of where the images were uploaded from. So as we can see, most of the images did end up coming from the United States, a total of 96 of the 200 images, so 48%. And most of the other images were from Canada. However, we did manage to get a few images from other parts around the world, which we can't really see clearly from the distance you're at right now, since it's very light blue on white. Next, again, with information on the image, here we have the account type. So 119 of the 200 images were posted by organizations and 81 by individuals. As for the publication date, most of the images were extracted from 2020, as the collection of data was done in 2020, and a bit in 2021, as you can see here. And while we do have 2018 and earlier, the earliest post we have is from 2013. However, most of them were from 2018 among the 26 images that are way to the left on the graph to the right. Next, with information on the police officer. So as for the estimated age, 45 images had a 20 to 29-year-old police officers. In 57 images, 30 to 39. In 26 images, 40 to 49 years old. And in 4 of the images, 50 to 59. And in no images did we see police officers that seemed to be over 60. When we had a mix of multiple ages, we put that into the NA section, which is the brown bar to the right. Next, for gender, in 108 of the 200 images, male. In 11 images, female. In 34 of the images, it was mixed, and we were unable to see clearly in 47 of the images. Continuing with police officers' equipment. As for the reflective vest, in 72 of the images, police officers did have a reflective vest. In 86, they did not, and for the rest, we were unable to see. Again, with the police officers' equipment, in 100 images, so exactly half, 50%, the police officers did have a bulletproof vest. They did not in 36 of the images, and we were unable to see in 64 of the images. As for helmet usage, thankfully, most of the police officers did have a helmet on. So in 136 of the images, we saw police officers with helmets, without in 14 of the images. In 22 of the images, the helmet was present but not worn, which is understandable since, as I said earlier, the inclusion criteria was to have at least one bike patrol police officer. They did not have to be pedaling to be considered included. So in some of the images, the police officers weren't actually riding. They were taking a picture, for example, beside their bicycle. And we were unable to see in 28 of the images. As for information on the bike itself, interestingly enough, mountain bikes and hybrid bikes were shared among the images. So here we have 76 images and 77 for mountain and hybrid respectively. And road bikes were not so popular. So in 17 images, we saw road bikes. Absolutely no foldable bikes were seen in the images that were extracted. And we were unable to see in 30 of the images. As for whether or not the bicycles were electric motorized, so in 23 images, there was an electric motorized bike. There was not in 120 of the images, and we were unable to see in 49 of the images. This is actually a really interesting point that we'll get into shortly. So here we have the heart of the results. So what I just showed you recently with the graphs is variables individually. So essentially there are more or less 45 graphs, one for each category. And here this could give us a portrait of the average bike patrol police officer. So for example, here, the account type was mainly organizations. It was mainly posted in 2020 from the United States. In general, the police officers were 30 to 39 years old, male Caucasians. Most of the police officers did not have a reflective vest, did have a bulletproof vest and a helmet. And in general, the bike that was used was a hybrid bike, non-electric motorized, and with disc brakes. And once again, these are just 12 of many other variables that were extracted. So as for the discussion, documenting bike patrol police practice in regards to equipment is something that's feasible. We did try to be on an international scale. As you all saw with the map earlier, while we did manage to achieve a few images from around the world, most of them did end up being from the United States and Canada. There are two main reasons that we thought up that could be the reason why. First of all, there's the language barrier. So as stated earlier, we started with French and English keywords. And while we did manage to get keywords in other languages, from the get-go, we were in English and French. So most of our images did end up being in English and French. And there's also a simple possibility that maybe bike patrolling by police officers elsewhere in the world is something that's not as popular as in the USA and in Canada. And looking into the future to electric motorized bicycles can improve safety and functionality with our police officers. The reasons why for this is, first of all, some police forces only have bike patrol police officers in summer, which is 3 months a year. Not all of our police officers are active all year round. So imagine having someone who in general is inactive, and then all of a sudden they go from being inactive to being active 40 hours per week on a bicycle. Now, while they are riding at very low intensities, that doesn't change the fact that they're riding, for example, 8-hour shifts sometimes, even though it's at a low intensity. And also they have all their police equipment on, which is heavy and can cause injuries over time. So for injury prevention, having an electric motorized bike could help. Keep in mind here that when we say electric motorized bikes, we are talking about assisted electric motorized bikes. So not in the sense where you press a button and it advances for you. In the sense that, let's say you're going uphill on a bicycle, while the electric motorized bike can step in and help a bit. And also, let's say we have a bike patrol police officer that needs to intervene with someone who has an electric motorized bicycle. Well, having one themselves could make the difference between, for example, catching a suspect or not. As for the limitations, this was a very time-consuming process. First of all, the 200 images were extracted manually. And as I said earlier, we had 45 variables that were used to analyze each image. So essentially, we were answering 45 questions 200 times, so for each image. A possibility to solve this could be to use image processing, which is something that was obviously not used for this study. Another limitation are assumptions that were subjectively made based on the image. So earlier, for example, I presented you graphs on age, gender, and ethnicity. So those are things that could be considered hard to assume subjectively simply based on an image. So there is caution to be taken with that. However, since we were looking specifically for equipment, this wasn't a problem because if we see they have a helmet, well, they have a helmet. There's also caution to be taken with the data that's chosen to be extracted. So here we were extracting images. Imagine if someone wanted to extract a video, for example, 10-second clips of seeing whether or not a police force was being used viably. Well, we don't see what happens before and after the intervention if, for example, the video is of a police officer beating up a civilian. So we can't judge whether or not the police force was actually used in a good way or not. So once again, since we were looking for images and equipment, this wasn't a problem. And there's also the source of the images. So as you all know, anyone can create an Instagram account. You can choose your name. So earlier, I showed you a graph where we said 119 of the images were posted by organizations. Well, tomorrow I could go make myself an Instagram account, say I'm a police organization, and start posting stuff about that police organization. So there is caution to be taken with that. But once again, since we were just looking for equipment that's worn by the police bike patrol officers, that wasn't a problem for us. So in conclusion, what can this give us? This could lead into having educational guidelines, in our case for bike patrol police officers. Earlier, I showed you a brief table of a general portrait of your average police officer. So some police organizations don't have bike patrol police officer teams, and they might want to eventually have one. So having a general idea of what bike patrol police officers elsewhere have could really help making a bike patrol police force. For example, what kind of equipment to have their police officers wear, what type of bicycles to buy, what color bicycle, etc. And also social media platforms do have a lot of potential to be a great research method, especially when we look at first responders in a road safety context. So thank you for the funding to these 5 entities. And thank you for your time. And my contact information is right here.
Thank you, Jerome. Do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, we got a few.
I was just gonna a question about the metadata that you got. Did you ever consider asking like Instagram or Facebook to see if they have any more images, or was it just like a search you guys done through their platform?
It was a search that we made through the platform, and it was really only done by us without necessarily contacting them. We did manage through a few images finding others, and also if we found an image that was posted by a specific police organization, well, we'd go see that police organization. We'd go to see which other police organizations they might follow and go see the pages directly. So that did help. So it wasn't only by searching keywords in the search bar, but yes, that could have been something that we could have done to really contact them directly.
I got another question. Do you see your like in the future machine learning and AI like imaging process can speed up the sorting and the kind of asking all those questions, kind of figuring out criteria of like helmets and like age, demographic?
Absolutely. Personally, I don't have any experience in image processing, but I do think that eventually, if this was to become an actual research method used worldwide, having systems that do the work for us could really make this viable, because the main problem with this at the moment is the fact that it's really time consuming. So yeah.
Additional questions?
Just wondering if you had any police force involved in your research.
In Saguenay, in Chicoutimi, there is a team of 6 bike patrol police officers. So we did work with them, but not directly with this project. So this was a side project of working with them, but we didn't necessarily ask them for help with this. It was really just ourselves using Instagram. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I'm curious, how common are like police bicycle officers, and are there any contexts where they're preferred over those like in cars?
So what I mainly saw looking through the images was in New York, and I can't remember, but there were like 2 other cities that they mainly came from. And I think the main idea to have bike patrol police officers is really to get closer to the population and understand their needs, because as police officers, I'm not a police officer personally, but it seems threatening to see a police officer arrive in a vehicle with all their gear, etc. So having them on bicycles could make the difference between people coming up and talking to them about problems that may be happening in the city or not. So the main idea, I think, to bike patrol police officers is really getting closer to the general population.
Great response. Maybe traffic too. New York, a lot of bad traffic.
Yeah.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, thank you, Jerome. So that concludes our panel today, or that concludes our session. I believe that each of the presenters are going to be getting a card that is providing some funding from CARS to the Young Professionals Committee. So thank you again. Just a quick note, this session is over now, so you don't have to stick around. You can go explore the exhibitors. The student posters are in room A, so go take a look at those also. And then I believe break is right after.